This presentation is brought to you by Arizona State University's Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability for educational and non-commercial use only.
We're going to switch gears and rather than talking about low-impact development, head back and talk about waste. And this time we're going to be talking about household hazardous waste with the City of Mesa. And we did a feasibility study to look at permanent facilities versus having events throughout the year to collect this type of waste.
Okay, so first we wanted to go into, what is household hazardous waste, or HHW as we abbreviated it? So the EPA defines it as leftover household products that contain corrosive, toxic, ignitable, or reactive ingredients. And so that's all kinds of stuff that's in your home. So batteries, motor oils, electronics, paint. So all these things that people have in their households left over from projects, and people tend to dispose of it improperly, they tend to hold on to it. So why manage it? HHW really does have an impact on water quality, especially pesticides, things like that, and the general health of the community. There are things like in these items that are toxic to people and also are difficult to throw away. So there needs to be a system and like a way for a municipality to account for that and to allow its citizens and its residents to have a safe way of disposing of these materials. So our scope of work was to assist in exploring the feasibility of a permanent facility for the City of Mesa to process this type of waste. Their current situation is that they put on 4 events a year. These are quarterly events held in 2 different sites in Mesa. And Patricia and I actually had the opportunity to volunteer at one of these events. And yeah, there's a lot of people that come in, basically go car by car, take the stuff out of their car, whether it's batteries, motor oil, paint, all different kinds of ranges of items, and bring it to the proper disposal site by a contractor. So what we noticed is that it's a very hurried process. There are a lot of people to get through and in a few hours. So Mesa has really seen increased participation over the years in terms of the residents that bring in materials. So looking into why a permanent facility, obviously there is a capital cost that goes into that. So why would it be important to transition from these 4 quarterly events to something permanent? So Mesa and the City of Phoenix area in general has experienced a lot of population growth, like skyrocketing population growth. So that means more waste, more households, so more opportunities for participation. And like I said, they had a lot of increased participation rates in these quarterly events. And there's definitely greater convenience for customers because when you drive in, you're there for a certain hourly window. It's only quarterly, so it's difficult for customers who don't have really the investment to say, okay, I'm going to go drop off my materials at this event, because oftentimes, it's not convenient for them, especially for people who don't work 9-to-5 jobs, who have to work on the weekends, because these are typically held on a Saturday. So having a permanent facility expands the hours and makes it more likely that people are actually going to participate in this program, and it helps in general increase Mesa's diversion rates. And this is just a graph of the town of Gilbert and their HHW facility and how they've increased their diversion through it. So our research questions, question 1 was what process was used to create a permanent HHW facility? So we were looking into funding, the current situation, and the cities that we looked into. And then what are the pros and cons of permanent HHW facilities? So looking into these qualitative things that the City of Mesa could think about in terms of whether or not to build a facility. And finally, into the cost question, which is one of the biggest questions, capital, operating, and also cost per car or cost per unit of waste brought in.
Okay, so I'm going to go here first. So as Sarita just mentioned, we looked at 3 different facilities, one in Gilbert, one in Albuquerque, and the county one in Butte County. So we were given a lot of information from Mesa, and we consolidated this information and then additionally contacted the city, the cities in the county individually to get further information from them, and then did outside research in addition to that on these facilities and on HHW facilities in general. So the idea for question 1, so what process was used to create a permanent HHW facility? We looked at the background for how it was created in order to be able to draw comparisons to Mesa. And so as you can see on this slide, just for some comparison, you see the population of all 3. And to give you an idea for Mesa, it has about 457,000 people in it. So the first facility that we looked at was in Gilbert, Arizona. And before they built their facility, they had 2 events per year, one in the fall and one in the spring. And due to growing popularity and a need and a desire to divert more HHW from the landfill, they constructed their facility in 2008. And they built it on their own property on the South Area Service Center. and they were able to get funding from being a part of the capital improvements program for the city, and they both own and operate their facility. Albuquerque, New Mexico was the second facility that we looked at. In 1988, they began having 2 collections, 2 one-day events per year. And because, again, of growing popularity and a desire to provide greater convenience to residents, they decided to build their facility in 1992. And they put out an RFP for a contractor to both own and operate this facility, and offered up to $1.2 million for the 2-year contract. And this 1.2 involved operations and helping with additional one-day events that they have, and they try to have about 2 more events per year in addition to this facility. Advanced Chemical Transport won the bid, and so they own and operate this facility, and Albuquerque regionalizes within this county and with surrounding smaller areas. Butte County, California is the 3rd facility. It was built in 1995, and it serves the whole county. And while there are 2 additional facilities in the county, this is the only one that accepts material from multiple municipalities. The funding came from a Cal Recycle grant for fiscal year 94-95, and NRC Environmental both owns and operates this facility.
So the second research question that we investigated was, what are the pros and cons of having a permanent household facility, hazardous household waste facility for the City of Mesa? And we think this is really important because you need to look at why it would be a good thing, why it would be a bad thing, and then really do what's best for you. And there's lots of things to take into consideration. We read several studies. There were some for Connecticut and New Hampshire. They really laid out some different options about what are the pros, what are the cons, and then we took some of those ideas along with some information from the 3 cities we looked at and came up with this comprehensive list of the pros and cons that we're going to further elaborate on. So some of the benefits of a permanent facility. Sarita covered a lot of this, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. So for the City of Mesa, it is expected that they would have increased participation and greater populations would be reached. And here the key is really convenience, and that's something that they wanted, the City of Mesa wanted us to elaborate on, because currently with their 4 events a year, it's on a Saturday, it's really inconvenient. I mean, who wants to get up early on a Saturday morning and go lug their household hazardous waste to the corner, at the city facility where they're doing this, and it's not really convenient. So the idea is that they would be able to reach people at a more convenient time. They could go during the day, and also it would reach a greater population of people because it would be more accessible to them. It also would encourage proper disposal and increase reuse opportunities. And the reason for this is because when basically if you have a facility or if you have events 4 times a year, you're storing stuff at your house. You're gonna wait and then take it when you can, but sometimes people just throw stuff away instead, rather than wait, because it can pile up in their garage. You don't know what you're gonna do with it. So instead, they can take it when they have it, which will really save a lot of time and effort for that, and so it'll increase proper disposal there, and then it will also increase reuse opportunities, because there are things like paint where you can store it there and then people can come pick up their paint. They can have a reuse center, which I know you guys already have some reuse opportunities, but the hope is that it'll increase that. Also, benefits of a permanent facility are having cleaner water supplies in the area, and as Sarita mentioned, HHW can, if it's not properly disposed of, can negatively impact the water quality in the area. So the idea is that with proper disposal, that will also increase or help with water supplies in the area. And then another benefit is that with a permanent facility, you don't need, when you have, compared to the events, you don't need to get a lot of volunteers, you don't need to hire police officers, you don't have to have traffic control at those 4 events. Instead, you just have a permanent facility where people can come and go as they want. You don't have to coordinate and plan this huge event, market all this stuff. It's just something that's going to be there. So instead, they would need to develop a marketing plan just for that facility, but it wouldn't have to be a big, extensive thing that would have to be with some of the 4 events. And finally, some other benefits are increased safety and decreased liability. And one thing that they recommended we focus on is looking here at the liability associated with bulk. Everything would be stored at this facility for a longer period of time, and you can bulk it together, send it off to the supplier and manufacturer, and it's also more cost effective that way as well. And that's another thing to consider also. So some disadvantages of permanent facility. Of course, you have to look at the positives, but also weigh the negatives. So it is location dependent. They have a site picked out in mind for this potential facility, but it does limit where it's going to be. You can't hold these events throughout the city anymore. It would be at one place. So it would affect it would be more inflexible. You couldn't necessarily hold an event at the south side and the east side. It would just be in one area. So that's something to consider when you're trying to reach a greater population, especially because Mesa has a lot of space. There's also liability with the processing and the storage. So once again, you're going to be keeping materials longer at a permanent facility, but that means you have to, the EPA has certain requirements for certain flooring, certain temperatures for rooms that are storing certain materials, so that you have to make sure you're in compliance with all that, so there's more liability to take into consideration, rather than if you were with a just an event where you take it off site right away. There's also a complex permitting process, especially with the EPA. You have to apply with all the regulations for creating a facility like this. So it's just a process that currently Mesa does not have to work with. And also with a permanent facility, you need to have well-trained staff. And there's a study that said it costs approximately $5,000 to train a employee to work at a HHW facility. So depending on how many people they would employ, they would have to spend an upfront cost on that as well. And then also, because you're working with the city, you need to have public and political justification, which would be required. So it would have to be approved by the city. You're spending a significant amount of money up front building this facility, so you have to get that all approved for the city. So those are some of the pros and cons associated with having a permanent versus a temporary hazardous household waste facility. So then we looked at costs, because that's definitely an issue when you're considering this. So instead of doing an entire whole economic feasibility analysis, we basically took the three cities that we looked at. We looked at Butte County, Albuquerque, and Gilbert. We wanted to compare their costs to Mesa and see where they are and what could be done for the future. So we broke it down to three different categories. We have capital and fixed costs, and this is really looking at the cost for the facility. Then we have the yearly operating costs here, and then we have the cost per car. And really the goal is that you want to reduce your cost per car, because that's where you're going to see the greatest benefit. I mean, there's always an upfront cost building a facility. You can see here that the facilities can be pretty expensive. Gilbert, who built theirs in 2008, spent about $800,000 on their facility. So there is an upfront cost, which is expensive, but the hope is that you'll get a payback in your return, because you'll be reducing your cost per car with the amount of material coming in. It'll be less money to process all that. So we included Mesa in this chart here, where their yearly operating costs are currently around $500,000 a year for their 4 events, but that's not at a permanent facility, and this compares to the permanent facility. So the hope is that that would also be able to decrease as well. And then we also put that in the mix here. Currently, Mesa's cost per car is about $70, and the hope is that that would decrease as well. As you can see here, that these cities that have the cost per car, it varies depending on the region and everything, but some of them are lower than Mesa is currently.
So going over our general recommendations, we do recommend that Mesa pursue building a permanent facility for their household hazardous waste. Cost per unit decreases. And this is going into some of the things that we talked about in some of the previous presentations, in that yes, you can look at actual costs, but then there are kind of non-monetary valuations in terms this provides a really great service for the city, and a really important one in terms of safety, in terms of keeping the community healthy. So though you can't really monetize that cost, by decreasing the cost of doing that per unit, or the cost of how much it costs people to bring in stuff, then that's really helpful. And in that way, it relates to increased convenience, awareness, and usage. So a permanent facility would help them do their job better, essentially, and that they can do things more cost effectively, even if yearly and operational costs don't necessarily decrease.